has been filtering what we do know about the disease from what we don't know. Remember those early days when voice notes were shared telling you to drink hot water or stay away from metal and keep your throat hydrated. Remember those middle days when the benefits of hydroxychloroquine were invoked and even briefly bleach by the US president. Well, two scientists have taken it upon themselves to call out, their words, bullshit, to show the susceptibility even of science and to make us question how we're using the information that bombards us. Profs Bergstrom is an evolutionary biologist and West is a data scientist. Calling Bullshit is the name of their new book, and they join us right now. Jevin, to you first. Everyone, I think, thinks they know what bullshit is, but each of our interpretations will be different. What's yours?
Well, Carl and I have worked really hard on this definition, so I'll put it out there. So it involves language, but also statistical figures, data graphics, and other forms of presentation intended to persuade by sometimes overwhelming and impressing us, rather than what a liar might do, which is just pushing us away from the truth. Well, bullshitters just they disregard truth and logical coherence.
And what do you think during this pandemic or the last few months, what has been the biggest or the most dangerous moment in terms of the bullshit that has been taken on board or not questioned enough?
Well, I think it's the conspiracy theory. Oh, go ahead, Carl.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that, it sounds like we probably have different answers, which is sort of fun. I think that the biggest danger was the moment that the sort of lead purveyors of misinformation shifted from kind of, the classical disinformation purveyors of troll farms and that sort of thing to the White House and the U.S. government, treating the crisis as a public relations crisis instead of a public health crisis, and spinning the numbers and spinning the story and providing inaccurate information to the public. At that point, you start to lose public trust, which is absolutely essential during a pandemic because you need public trust in order to execute the various, non-pharmaceutical interventions like staying home, like wearing masks, all of this that are going to be needed.
Let me ask you about something very recent. Today we saw Lewis Hamilton, Formula One racer here, issue a retraction for his suggestion or implication that Bill Gates was part of a vaccination conspiracy. Now, where do you stand on something like this? Do you say that should just be shut down straight away? Do you think it should be apologised for? What do you see going on here?
Well, what's interesting about the Bill Gates conspiracy is how much it's risen during this particular pandemic. I mean, Bill Gates has been at the center of a lot of conspiracy theories. But in this case, what's interesting is that the conspiracy theory is mostly about Bill Gates wanting to control us by putting vaccinations in our body and track us. But we're tracked all the time with credit cards and computers in our pockets. So the conspiracy itself is interesting. But yes, we should probably try to knock this down right away because it distracts us from the health advice that people should be paying attention to.
Carl, you pointed specifically to the White House in terms of the disinformation you were calling out. But more broadly, you do have to be sympathetic to people, to governments who are trying to find their way through a very bleak forest of information in the middle of a pandemic, don't you? I mean, there will be a lot of questions that come up, like I raised, whether hydroxychloroquine could work and whether the Lancet should be doing a study or cancelling a study. We should be looking into these things, shouldn't we, rather than just saying that's conspiracy or that's rubbish, shut down debate?
Oh, absolutely. We have to be looking into all these things. And one of the key things that's happening during a pandemic, especially with a brand new infectious disease that wasn't in humans only 7 months ago, is that we're learning so much as we go along. And so what we know in March is completely different than, say, what we know now. And policy advice has to adapt to those, to the changing realities on the ground. The thing that I find very frustrating is that over and over again in the United States, and I see this in Britain as well, the entire scientific debate and the entire public health debate has become politicized. So we're not just arguing about who's going to pay for treatment. We're now arguing about these very, very basic facts, like whether or not children can carry the disease, whether or not it's more dangerous than influenza, and things like this that shouldn't be political divisions.
But those are just questions people are trying to get right and trying to understand. And I guess people that don't have scientific brains or education want to get a grasp of it more carefully because it's not so obvious. I mean,
well, absolutely, it's not obvious to anybody. But what's very odd that's happened in this particular pandemic is that the answers, the alternative answers to these questions, or the alternative possibilities, have been assigned this political valence.
Yeah.
So if I'd talked to you a year ago and said, hey, one side is going to like hydroxychloroquine and the other side is going to like masks, there's no particular reason you would have said, oh, conservatives in one direction and liberals in the other. But everything has become polarized like this.
I wonder,
this is a recipe for lots of bullshit.
But isn't the stepping in also political to some extent? Because you must decide, where you draw the line between truth and what we now call cancellation culture. Isn't it better to have that debate, to let that debate play out, rather than to say this is bullshit, we mustn't discuss this anymore? Well,
I think, saying this is bullshit, we mustn't discuss it is a mistake. You need to talk about these things. But what needs to happen is that the discussion needs to be made on the totality of the evidence rather than cherry picking from a very small number of studies that happen to support each side's favorite direction. And that's, so that's something we've really stressed throughout in writing the book and in everything that we do around this, is the need to make decisions based on rigorous evidence and to not have the evidence get manipulated or altered by wishful thinking.
Carl Bergstrom, Jevon West, thank you both very much indeed. Thank you. Sadly, we don't have time for